Welcome to the IA on AI podcast, part of the Audit Podcast Network, where we bring you weekly updates on AI from the internal auditor's perspective. Here we go. Hello, everybody. This week, rather than doing our weekly update, we have a special guest. We have John Thompson back on the show, mainly because I'm out of the country right now, and so there's no way that we could possibly put out a weekly update series, so we're going to sub this in for now. All right. So John was on the full audit podcast in January. We talked about AI agents. If you don't know, real quick, John is not necessarily an audit guy, but he is all AI. He's been doing AI since AI was a thing practically. And by that, I mean for 40 years. He previously developed the AI solutions at Ernst & Young. And so that's kind of where especially his kind of audit knowledge has come from, as well as just being in industry. He's aware of risk management, internal audit, et cetera, the roles that all they play. For this episode, we talk specifically about John's book, A Path to AGI. We actually took some clips from a future episode of the Audit Podcast where we do a full kind of deep dive on the book. And this episode is going to be the highlight kind of reel from that episode. So we just pulled out one or two clips for this week. The reason being, there's been a lot of discussion around AGI. I know in a lot of the newsletters that I see, there's hey, we're close to AGI, or this feels like AGI is something I saw on a message board the other day. Like, this feels like AGI. It's not. We're not there. And so next week, we'll be back with the full weekly updates on AI as it relates to internal audit. So also in the book, a few things that I pulled out. So one that I thought was interesting was that you say that you still recommend kids major in computer science when they go to college. And the reason I thought that was interesting is just because the ease of which anyone, for the most part, can write code with AI is, incredibly easy. So I wanted to hear a little bit more about why you think kids should do that. And one reason I asked that, and I really like the audience is internal auditors, but one of my favorite things about this is, so if anybody's familiar with Tim Ferriss' podcast, he basically picks whatever topic he's interested in. He finds somebody that's an expert, and it could be, across the spectrum of knowledge, and then he goes and grabs them. And so he almost says like it's just kind of like his playground. So with that said, anyone who's ever talked to me knows that if you ask me about my kid, I will talk for like 15 minutes about him. And so when I saw that, I went, okay, this is not really for the audience. This one's more for me, selfishly, and my kid. But so that's why I kind of wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I encouraged my son and daughter both to go to engineering school. Zach went to Illinois, computer science, and Kate went to Michigan, School of Information. And I hear this all the time. People are like, oh, Gen AI is writing code and there's no future for developers. Well, over the last couple of years, we generated about 4 million lines of code with Gen AI, and about 20% of it was usable. So, it does generate code, but it generates code in a very specific area, really simplistic things. Most of us, auditors understand this terminology, programmers understand this terminology. You have to do your housekeeping. You have to go through and set the registers and set up all the variables and do everything in programming. That's what Gen AI is good for.
Mhm.
When you get into sophisticated logic and trying to do something that's really hard to do, Gen AI doesn't do a very good job there. So yeah, so it's scraping off the bottom 20% of coding tasks. And if you talk to any developer, they would say, that's the 20% I don't want to do.
Yeah.
So it'll get better. There's no doubt about it. Gen AI and artificial intelligence is going to get better and better over our lifetimes. But I don't think we're going to get to a point of where Gen AI is generating production ready code for complicated applications for 20 or 25 years.
And I think if you follow enough developers online, Reddit, LinkedIn, wherever, you'll see where they echo the same thing. They're like, yeah, it's great for this, but it still can't. And I can't imagine it doing all of this. But to that, I was also curious, how's the curriculum? Because I know you're at Michigan. How's the curriculum changed relative to CS and analytics because of the use of Gen AI now?
Yeah, the conversation is ongoing, and the curriculum development and evolution is happening right now. So I was in a part of a conversation 2 weeks ago about, is vibe coding a bad thing? Should we be teaching vibe coding? And my perspective on it is if you teach vibe coding the way people talk about it, that's a very bad thing. But if you talk about vibe coding as a component or a phase of development that fits into the broader scheme of how code is developed, that's a very good thing. I'm pro AI, I'm pro development, I'm pro, evolution of technologies, but we need them to evolve. They don't show up fully formed. In this respect, AI is like children. They don't come out, speaking full sentences and writing Shakespeare and things like that. It takes a few years for them to get there. And AI is the same way. So we're in the early days of generative AI and causal AI. We'll get there.
Yeah.
But if you're going to college right now, or if you're in college or even a generation or two back and you want to study computer science, do it. You'll have a great career.
Also pulled from the book was your perspective and thoughts on emergent behaviors. And I think most of the audience is not familiar with that term. But if I summarize what you said about it in the book was it's ridiculous. So with that, if you can define it for the audience and then kind of give your thoughts on it.
Yeah. We, we're 3 years into Gen AI at this point, and it's really an interesting thing. We've had neural nets for 50 years or something like that, and we've done all sorts of modeling. We've built all sorts of models and everything, and the real interesting thing about Gen AI is that OpenAI, Amazon, and Google all basically jammed the internet through a neural network, and there's a lot of stuff on the internet, good and bad. So there for a while, people were finding out things in these models and saying, oh, it's coming up with its own thoughts. These emergent behaviors are happening. And I said, that's crazy. It's been trained on the breadth and the depth of the internet. So there are some corners of the internet you're not going to think of, but it's in there. So if you stimulate the model in a certain way, boom, these things pop out. This is not Gen AI, coming up with great new original thoughts. This is people finding the corners of the models and stimulating it and getting the information to come back out. So, you've looked at the book, Trent. I don't really have a starry-eyed view of this. I'm a very practical, pragmatic person. We will have great functionality coming out of AI, but we're not going to have original thinking AI for a long time.
All right. If you are an avid listener of, I think we've done like 3 episodes of this so far, you know that we do not have an outro for this show yet. And I only think about it when we actually record and do all the work on that week's episode, and then it kind of goes away. So we've put it out there that if anybody wants to submit one, we will happily read it. And so we got 5 this week. So we're going to read those for this week, and then we'll see what happens. If there's one that you're like, yeah, that's the one, man, absolutely run with that one, we'll run with that one. Okay. So let me get my podcast outro voice here. Stay sharp, stay ethical, and let the data lead the way. Until next time, keep auditing the algorithms and questioning the code. From controls to code, keep your insights intelligent. All right, I think the last 2 are my favorites of these. Audit smart, think deep, and trust, but verify your AI. Didn't realize that the verify and AI would rhyme as I read it out loud like that. That one's not bad. Okay, last one. So this is Trent Russell on the IA on AI weekly series, signing off from the intersection of assurance and artificial intelligence.